Hey, Mike here with Canadian Musician once again here at Canadian Music Week. Sitting with me, real pleasure. One of the most, I guess, within industry, within music circles, within Toronto. Circles and circles. Yes. But anyways, Mike Tanner, the relatively newly appointed Music Sector Development Officer for the City of Toronto, and here to kind of explain exactly what this new position is. Well, let's start with that, actually. Coming into it, because it is a brand new position, you're the first person to be Music Sector Development Officer for Toronto, and part of your initial mandate was really just to, as far as I understand, was really just to figure out what this job is and should be. Now that it's been at least a few months, do you have a clear understanding of what your goal is or your mandate is for this position?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and I'd have to commend you right off the top for actually getting the title right. Music Sector Development Officer, it's a big thing. It doesn't fit on a t-shirt very easily. So yeah, you're right. It was created by City Council in 2013. They passed a couple of reports, both of which really recognize the value of music in the whole kind of commercial ecosystem. I'm part of a team, film and entertainment industries team, which is in turn part of economic development and culture. It's important that it's there because that means music is recognized as an economic driver. So over and above everything else, the overarching mandate of the position is to create economic benefit, that's jobs, that's direct impact on communities, that's employing people, that's perhaps making it easier for existing businesses to do business, that kind of stuff. And that takes a lot of different shapes and forms. The team that I'm part of, there is no music office per se. We have film, we have event support, which are the people who actually help execute things on the street, whether they're festivals or working with other city departments to make things happen in the community. And there's also the in-house tourism people, visitor services in Toronto. So it all kind of ties together in a cohesive whole. There are a number of objectives. I can kind of run them through in sort of three main buckets, if you will. One of them is definitely to streamline processes between the music community and City Hall. This can take a lot of different forms. I mean, the way venues are licensed, what kinds of activities can happen in the community, what sort of zoning we have. I mean, some of our bylaws and regulations, while very well intentioned, are things that are holdovers from a few years ago. And so as the city changes, and Toronto is probably changing as fast as any city in the world with the amount of construction and downtown residential density increasing, we have this constant push and pull, a constant dialogue between arts and culture, music venues, for example, and increasing residential density. So our bylaws, our regulations, our ways of dealing with these things have to be up to date. And so part of my role and my team's role is to act as a conduit between the industry. What does the industry need and want? When I say industry, I'm meaning everybody from fans to really grassroots promoters to artists, of course, who are at the beginning and the end of the conversation anytime you talk about this, to record companies, to management, to labels. What do all those people need to thrive? And not just survive, but to thrive. And then what does the whole community, Toronto, need? So streamlining permits, processes, licenses, regulations, that kind of stuff. We're trying to create ways in which Toronto can welcome music in all parts of the city. So not just, currently a lot of the music activity is, as you know, you hear Canadian music, Queen West, Kensington Market, College, to a certain extent the Yonge Street corridor. And of course, everybody who wants to have a picnic with bands playing in the park has got to go to Trinity Bellwoods, right? It's not a picnic if it doesn't happen at Trinity Bellwoods. So we're trying to find a way, not to decrease the activity there, but to spread it around a little bit, right? I mean, there are lots and lots and lots of great artists and fans in Scarborough or Etobicoke or North York. Maybe even as far out as Burlington, although that's not our mandate. But we want to try to create cultural hubs where music can flourish. I'm talking about live music, but I'm also talking about things like incubators where people come together with ideas and spreading it around a little bit. And that means engaging with certainly city councillors, with the BIAs in the area, with the residents associations, with introducing things sometimes incrementally so it's not like a big shock, like all of a sudden you wake up and there's an EDM festival in your backyard. We don't want that. but we want to move towards an area or a situation where those things become more of the fabric of the city across the city. The third thing really is I think if you do numbers 1 and 2 well, in the long term, your city, Toronto, becomes more known as the great music city that it is. Those of us who have worked in the music industry here in Toronto for a long time, nobody probably knows this better than the musicians, is that it's a fantastic scene. It really is amazing. I mean, there's a ton of live music venues, there's all the record companies, the management, everything from really indie labels. It doesn't matter what genre. We have an incredible global hub here, so you get all kinds of amazing music from across the world here. But my neighbor probably doesn't know that, or she may not know that, right? She might think of Toronto as a media capital, as a finance capital, as a business capital, as a center of politics, all of these things, which it is, but we want to add music to that conversation. And as I say, I think if you enable the community, the music community, to do what it does better and with fewer impediments, and you spread the love around a little bit around the whole city, then it does become known as that center of music, which we hope that it will be.
Interesting. And just a quick thing to you did that a bit there when you were touching on labels and that sort of thing. But when I've read about yourself within this position and the creation of this position, that a lot of it does seem to focus on the live music sector. And but does your office or your position, does that also include the real wealth of recording studios and recording facilities that we have here in Toronto?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what I've been doing as I'm learning the ropes at City Hall is actually sort of connecting business to business. People will phone and say, we're looking for a place to just do some quick tracking, and I happen to know, so I'll just connect those people. And or we're looking for, anybody have a contact of somebody who can do some production at Revolution, so we may know that too, so recording studios, management companies, certainly the labels. We're in close contact with both the majors through organizations like Music Canada and the more independent labels through organizations like SEMA. So if you're an artist, one way or the other, your path could very well lead to the film and entertainment industries team. We might be able to help you with something, and it doesn't just necessarily mean if you're a live venue or a festival organizer. So all parts of the ecosystem we see as working together to create benefit for everybody.
And admittedly, before I even asked it, this is a fairly broad question, but there seems to have reached a tipping point almost in the last few years as far as music and the music industry being recognized as a real economic generator. Not just here in Toronto. Obviously, Toronto's done it. Hamilton, just down the road, also opened a music office. On the provincial level, the provincial government has just made a permanent contribution to the Ontario Music Fund. The federal government released an industry-wide report just recently. We're seeing provincial associations across the country creating these music economic surveys so that they can get things going in that regard in their own industries. Do you have an understanding or have any theories as to why all of a sudden governments are really kind of starting to recognize the importance of music as an economic driver?
Boy, that's the last part of your questions are really, I was nodding my head in agreement with everything you were saying, because I was thinking the same thing. There seems to be a real critical mass of recognition at all levels of government, institutionally, here, across Canada and the States. I know there's music offices in Australia and Ireland and kinds of things like that. Why is it happening now? Well, I think one thing, and I can speak sort of locally here, a lot of players in the music community have started to sing cohesively together. In other words, you might find competing festivals or venues or record companies at the table together speaking to civic, provincial or federal government and putting aside internecine strife and rivalries and saying, you know what, we all kind of want shades of the same thing, so let's come to the table, engage whichever level of government we're talking to, and talk about things we have in common and what would benefit the whole industry rather than, a Hatfield and McCoy's kind of situation. That's one thing. I think another thing is that there have been more industry organizations and venues, music festivals that are actually starting to measure their own economic impact. You know, my friend Jeff Cohen, who owns the Horseshoe, would have known 10 years ago that if he books a great band at the Horseshoe, that the band is making money and that the Horseshoe's making money at the bar. But he might not have been thinking, well, okay, what about taxi companies? What about the restaurant around the corner? What about the hot dog guy on the sidewalk in front of my venue? What about the hotels that are nearby if it's a band that, you know, is drawing people in from Buffalo or Kingston or Montreal? Now I know Jeff, and I know many other Jeffs across the province would have a better sense of what that is, actually be able to quantify it, put it down in a spreadsheet and say, here, you know what, this is as valid as it is for you, government, to support as it is to support another industry and another way of doing business. And so I think more that's happening, and it's tied in with tourism. We know that cultural tourists stay longer and spend more than tourists who travel for other reasons. We know that if you get people coming to Coachella or coming to Canadian Music Week when they're young from another place, they're going to come back again and again and again. And initially, the tourist industry might not know how to measure those people because they're young people and they're couch surfing and they're maybe not playing rounds of golf. But they are having a great time. They're finding out what a great city Toronto is. They're spending money in restaurants and bars. They're going to buy a T-shirt and they're going to be back next year. And then when they're 35 or 40, they're going to think, yeah, you know what, I'm looking for someplace to go with my family. I've always had a great time in Toronto. Let's go back there. So I think all of these things working together is why these things are happening. And as we're discussing this, because I know, you know, who will be, to a certain degree, who will be looking at your site and who reads the magazine. So I want to tie it back to what individual artists and musicians get from all this, because I think sometimes there's a tendency to see this kind of talk as a bit dry and a bit institutional, and I understand that. But I actually believe that when these things happen at the levels you and I are talking about now, that they do for sure affect individual musicians looking to get gigs, looking to get paid fairly for those gigs, looking to get distribution for their CD, looking to find ways to monetize their work. All of this stuff is part of the same conversation, and I think it's an important thing for individual artists, musicians, to be aware that, you know what, in these corridors that you may not normally tread through, discussions are happening that will affect your ability to make a livelihood if you're making a career in music.
Interesting. Sort of related to that point, I had read when you first took this job, there was an excellent article in the Toronto Star. I think it was called Meet Your New Music Man, Toronto, or something like that. And within that article, you said you essentially the first task at hand was getting, I think, what you called a state of a state of the industry or state of the union kind of thing. Just before you can make changes, you need to figure out what changes need to be made and why. Where are you kind of in that process, and do you have tangible things in mind now that you realize are either maybe don't need to be changed or in good shape, or where you can make real gains or progress? Sure,
I can give you a couple of examples. The area that we haven't moved much in yet, and I'm hoping that we can activate this throughout the rest of this year, we have a bit of a timeline on this, is to actually get some hard numbers on I've heard there are 150 live music venues in Toronto. I don't know myself right now whether that number is accurate or not. It's kind of hard to know, too. I mean, an Italian restaurant that has music once a month, does that count? You know, and so we have to establish some standards there. I know we were just talking about economic impact, that certain venues and festivals and music companies know their own economic impact, but I don't see yet a place where all of that information is collected in one place. I believe that the music industry in Toronto right now generates around $500 million a year, but I would like to see a little bit of verification on that number. So we definitely need to make some progress on working with our industry organization partners and individual companies to sort of say, okay, can we put these numbers together and come up with a state of the nation financially, and how many recording studios there are, and how many management companies, and how many labels, and where are they, or how many festival sites, and all of that. This time next year, we'll have a clear picture of that. The other things that we're working on, and we have started to work on, circulate back to the first point I talked about, which is sort of streamlining processes and dialogue communication between the music community and the city. There, we've started by reaching out to venue owners, people who book venues, people who own or lease live music venues, and we're talking to them about what kinds of experiences and recommendations and circumstances are either helping them do business as they're doing it now, or are a little bit of a stumbling block. And out of that, we've distilled a few recommendations having to do with licensing and zoning particularly, and also having to do with the way we deal with noise. And taking those recommendations forward to the relevant city departments, we're embarking, and we've already started on this process, and we're making some progress, and we'll make more progress soon enough, on discussions where we can come together in a compromise between, I mentioned earlier, the bylaws, the regulations, the permits, the issues, and what the industry needs. So there we're making some very real strides, and that's part of the State of the Nation thing, because you don't want to start recommending changes before you know what kinds of changes are the most relevant, what's 1, 2, 3 on a priority list, and also, frankly, what's feasible. I mean, a lot of great ideas out there. Some of them may be things that we say, you know what, that's not something we're going to get to this year or next. It may be a long-term plan. And frankly, there may be some things that we say we can't touch that. That's not city jurisdiction. It's a bigger part of the puzzle. You know, if somebody were to come to me and talk about, streaming rights on Spotify, I would say, well, I may not be the best conduit to help, move that discussion ahead. You want to talk to me about venue licensing, maybe that's something I can put a little bit more emphasis on right now. So there's where we're headed, and in the long term, I think we'll be working on some of these other objectives that I mentioned, and finding ways to measure where we are and what kinds of progress we've made. For example, we don't know right now how many people come to Toronto for music tourism. Love to know that. Reach out to some festivals through this summer, see if we can get some numbers, so we'll know at the end of 2015 where we were during that year.
And I'm sure that number is about to kind of balloon this summer with festivals kind of moving into town, into North America for the first time, and they've picked Toronto as the launching point, which kind of tells you something right there. I know it's not technically actually in Toronto, but the Way Home Festival is kind of commonly referred to as Bonnaroo Toronto, or whatever you call it. And Urban Roots Festival is now, I think it's third year, and it's doing very well. It's a great event. But anyways, before we wrap up here, the one other thing I kind of just looking for some clarification on is this, and it was signed a couple years ago, but has got more attention, or renewed attention recently, as you and new Mayor John Tory headed to South by Southwest, is...
we checked out hip-hop shows for the first time.
Exactly. But as you probably guess, I'm getting to this Music City Alliance between Toronto and Austin, and it sounds very nice and all, but what does it... I guess what's it going to mean in real world terms?
That's a great question. I mean, that's something that some of us who were around when it was created. This is also something that was mandated by City Council, by the way, way back in 2013. Created the Alliance, and created also the Toronto Music Advisory Council, 30 members drawn across the industry who act as a advisory board for the city. So the Austin Alliance is industry-led association. There's city involvement on both sides. It was signed initially by then Mayors Ford and Leffingwell in October 2013 and just revitalized by Austin Mayor Steve Adler and our Mayor John Tory in March during South by Southwest. So what does it mean? It means that there is initially and inherently an exchange of goodwill and good faith and good intentions between the two cities. It means that there is a constant dialogue between music industry leaders in Austin and those in Toronto. We have an alliance committee of 4 industry members advised by a larger group who get on the phone once a month regularly with their counterparts in Austin, and they talk about things like can we plan a summit where we get people from Austin to come to Toronto, vice versa, and talk about business opportunities. What about touring? You know, if you're a Canadian act about to break, and you want to go down through the American Southwest, let's build that around an Austin play. Let's build that around getting some radio exposure, a couple of great club gigs. Let's build that around getting a nice support slot on a festival in Austin. All of these things that you might not as easily be able to do without those kinds of connections, no matter who your agent and your management are. We're talking about Air Canada, as you know, probably is just instituting a direct flight between Toronto and Austin. Inaugural flight's May 18th, actually. About talking with Air Canada from both sides about making that flight a real showpiece for musicians. And since there's so much travel between those two cities and two cities that identify themselves as music cities, let's get some other companies on board who are willing to play and interested in playing with that group. And say we're the musicians company in this sphere. So there's business advocacy, there's direct support for artists who are touring, there's exchange of best practices, there's the will to develop new projects together. I think it'll play out probably most tangibly for Toronto artists that are at the level who they would be touring in the States. Same thing for Austin artists coming here. And frankly, music fans, because you're going to see, like even right away, we've got as centerpieces of the Pan Am's programming on Nathan Phillips Square, Alejandro Escovedo and Explosions in the Sky, 2 great Austin-based artists. That may not have happened without the impetus that's led, to the Alliance as well. And we'll see the same kinds of things happening down there. We're going to have Artists of the Month featured, an Austin artist featured here, Toronto artist featured there, those kinds of things. So we're trying to make it more than signatures on a paper, that what does this mean, and actually have it take some tangible shape that helps musicians.
Sounds fantastic. Mike, I've kept you. I really appreciate this, and I appreciate you kind of explaining at length all of this. I'm really looking forward to see what ends up coming of all the work that you're doing right now, and should be exciting times for music in this city and outside of Toronto, really, as well.
Good. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.